Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Josh Prager, and I'm one of the founders of 20 Summers, and really happy that you're here. It's a very exciting night for me personally tonight, and it's a great honor to have you here, Bill. You will sort of give a more proper introduction, but I'll just say, as all of you know, Bill's thinking, his analysis has changed the game forever, this game that we all love. And it is just a thrill to meet you. And so often, it's not a good idea to meet the people you admire. They invariably disappoint. And meeting you, it's been lovely this evening. So thank you so much. And finally, I want to say it's a delight to have Rob. I can call Rob a friend, and not just a colleague and a fellow baseball writer, but he's the author of 6 books. And you were an ESPN columnist for 15 years, is that right? And now doing all sorts of great things. And just when we met through an article that I wrote about Bobby Thompson's shot heard around the world. And I knew he was a good guy when, after he wrote about me in very generous words, he noticed that I was the person who almost caught a ball at a Yankee-Seattle playoff game. Now, that's a great thing. The only problem was this game happened on one of the Jewish holidays, and I was not supposed to be at the ballpark. And Rob said, "Hey, that's Josh. I'm going to write about him." And I said, "Please don't. It's kind of complicated." And he didn't. So I'm forever thankful to you for that. So thank you guys very much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me, Josh. This is my first visit to Provincetown, and now I don't want to go home to Portland tomorrow, so I'm a little stuck. But I actually began as a fan of Bill James, and then I worked for Bill for 4 years, and Bill's been very kind to me in the years since, and we've been friends, and so I feel like Bill doesn't need any introduction. But for anyone who doesn't know, Bill wrote his first baseball abstract in 1977, self-published. His first nationally published abstract, thanks in large part to Dan's article in SI, was in 1982. Bill has written many, many books since then, and in, I think, 2002, started with the Red Sox.
I did start with, that's right.
And I think is your title Senior Advisor?
Senior Baseball Operations Advisor. The problem with starting out as a senior advisor, no way to get promoted.
That's right. So I am going to start. I'm going to quote something Bill wrote a little later, which I know is painful, but I'm going to do it anyway. Actually, Bill wrote this too. This is the introduction. I'm sure you've never been quoted this before. This is the introduction to a book called "The Year the Yankees Lost the Pennant," which many of you might know as "Damn Yankees," the great musical. For those who haven't read the book or seen the movie or the play on Broadway or whatever, it's basically about a Washington Senators fan who is sick and tired of the Yankees winning the pennant every year. And I hope I'm not giving anything away. He makes a deal with the devil to become the greatest player in the world, basically Mike Trout or Bryce Harper, even better. And then everything follows from that. So this is the last paragraph of Bill's introduction to a reprinted paperback edition. I read this book aloud to 3 kids, all of whom absolutely loved it. The only people I know who don't love this book are those who have never read it. Joe Boyd learns, in the end, that he is living the life he was meant to live, and he is most grateful to return to it. Here's the key part. The devil and the Yankees will always be with us, but there is much to be grateful for in the lives we are meant to lead. Now, there's a lot of wisdom in there, but I will note that Bill wrote this in 2004. That was a very key year. He wrote this before the 2004 World Series. Since then, the Yankees, by the way, he also references in here someplace that the Yankees just got Alex Rodriguez, as if it were a great thing for the Yankees. Since 2004, the Red Sox have won 3 World Series, and the Yankees have won 1. So now it's really, if you were to write this book, it would be about the year the Red Sox lost the pennant.
That was last year.
That's true, it was last year. But the Red Sox have won 3 World Series. Bill has 3 World Series rings, which he's, of course, far too modest to wear. Bill was, who saw the movie Moneyball? Bill was immortalized in that, not as the cartoon character in the first script, but still a prominent role. And I don't want to embarrass Bill too much here, but I think that someone is going to create a Bill James for the Hall of Fame movement at some point in the not distant future, and I think he is well deserving in the pioneer category, even if they haven't really done much with that in a while. In 2006, Bill was named to Time's 100 of the year and went to a really cool party, as I recall. And at that time, Theo Epstein, who was still with the Red Sox, told John Henry, where's Bill? Where's the gloating? Where's the publicist? He's like somebody outlining the internet in the 80s and watching silently as it comes to pass. So, Bill, I'd like you to gloat for just a couple of minutes and talk a little bit about what it feels like to, I don't want to say you're a monument because you're still active, but what does it feel like to have 3 World Series rings and be sort of the one people talk about when they make a movie about sabermetrics or write books about it?
Well, everything good that happens to you, I'll bet if I ask you how you met your wife, somehow it's an accident. Everything good that happens to you is kind of an accident, except some of your children. I was just goofing around. I was just doing stuff for my own entertainment, and I thought other people are going to be interested in this, and I will make it available to those who are also interested and who would share my narrow interest. I always knew that the market was not as narrow as I was being told that it was, but I never had any understanding that it was as large as it turned out to be. But what I really never had any understanding of at the start was that these ideas I had for valuing players would become a sort of, or valuing assets within the game, would become a sort of standard architecture for professionals. And the story I always tell related to that is, one of the things I did was create a spreadsheet which projects how a player will hit next year. I was just goofing around. And I did it for several years before. I never published it, never told anyone except friends that I was even done it. And John DeWan saw it and said, we should publish that. And I said, no, you can't publish it. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't have any scientific validity. It's just messing around. And he said, well, we won't tell anyone that it has any scientific validity. We'll just publish it and say, take it for what it's worth. Well, now every team has some sort of projections that they rely on it. And when I look at it, I think, well, of course they do. I mean, how can you run a baseball team if you don't have any idea of what your players are going to do next year? If you don't have some starting line assumption, how do you proceed? And how do you proceed? So I look back on it and I think, well, sure. It's like a story I remember about, and only this is on a much greater scale than my own little work. But I remember a story about a guy who worked on the team that invented television, more or less, I think for GE in the 20s. And he was, one of his relatives was demanding to know, what good is it? And the explanation they would give is, well, you might go to a trade show and you're going to take, you're trying to sell something that's too big for you to physically transport it. So you can take this television and you could show what it is even to people who aren't there. That was his explanation of what the point of television was. He had no concept. He had no idea what they were developing. Mine's not on that scale, but it's the same thing. I had no idea what I was developing. I was just doing this. I didn't have any idea of it being used the way it's used now.
But was there a moment when you felt that this, maybe not that you arrived, but this thing arrived? I mean, if you're watching Moneyball, and I know you saw it early on and you were in the theater, isn't it strange to look up there and see yourself referenced in a movie that Brad Pitt is in? Or is this a moment that we place on you from the outside, and on the inside it all happens so gradually that there's no one moment where it all happens?
Well, there is not one breakthrough, but several breakthroughs. And Dan writing about me I think he wrote it in 79 and I'd publish it in 80. That was one breakthrough. And Michael Lewis writing about me in the Moneyball book was another breakthrough. The Red Sox hiring me was another. But there wasn't one thing. There were breakthroughs, yes, but not one. You will remember, because you were working for me at the time, that there was a time in the 1990s when all of the younger people who wanted to work in our field would write kind of nasty things about me because they were all taking pot shots at me. And I remember saying about it at the time, well, of course they do. Whenever anybody in this field catches a break, it's always me. And you know, of course other people resent it. But that's the way it was from 1979 to 2005. Whenever anybody in my field caught a break, it was always me. So it wasn't one thing, it was a lot.
Now you had dalliances with teams before the Red Sox, right?
Yes.
And was it? You think it's basically because John Henry really believed in you that this was the one that worked out?
Yes, there were times that I did some work with teams, but they would try to assign me tasks that were totally outside my skill set, and they didn't really have any understanding of what I was doing. And well, you know from working with me that I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and you can't really stop me from doing what I set out to do. And if that's not what you want to try to hire me to do, it ain't going to work.
Well, I left it in my room back at the inn, but I brought a copy of the first baseball abstract that Bill self-published from 1977, and I was leafing through it, and which I hadn't done in a long time. And Bill references stolen bases allowed by catchers and pitchers, pitcher run support, and fast pitchers and slow pitchers, how long it takes them to pitch, which are all things that you will still find on the internet today as if they were just invented yesterday. It sort of reminded me just how many things Bill wrote about well before they were fashionable. But I think Bill told me he sold 70 copies of that first abstract, and I was just, you mentioned why you published the first one, you thought there was a market for it, but why the second one?
Because I knew I hadn't done a good job with the first one.
That was the only reason?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to get into politics a little bit. I'm not going to ask about Donald Trump, though, although Bill can speak about that eloquently. So Bill recently wrote a mini diatribe against President Harry Truman, which sort of caught my eye because I didn't think Harry Truman was really that awful a president. Not that I've studied the matter. I went to find Nate Silver at 538 recently did a piece where he went back and looked at all the rankings, the scholarly rankings of presidents, and sort of put them all together. And the top five, maybe not a huge surprise: Lincoln, FDR, Washington, George Washington, Teddy Roosevelt, and Thomas Jefferson. If you're interested, he had Reagan 10th, Obama 17th, this was a couple years ago, and George W. Bush 38th. Harry Truman was number 6. Now, I think here's one of the things that sets Bill apart. If I had written that about Truman and then saw that ranking, I would have thought to myself, wow, where did I go wrong? And I think, Bill, probably your reaction is, where did those scholars go wrong?
Right.
Am I right about that?
You're exactly right. That's exactly right.
And
I can tell you where they went, Robert. Go ahead.
Please do. No, I really like to know.
There's no organized methodology to they have no organized methodology to think through their problem. The great writer who used my name, William James, has a brilliant section in one of his books in which he talks about the relationship between the highest level of questions and the lowest level of questions. And what he's trying to explain is, and I didn't discover this until I'd been writing for 30 years, is that analysis building understanding is a matter of breaking down the great questions which have no real answers into smaller questions which have slightly more objective answers, and smaller questions yet which have slightly more objective answers, until you get down to the level at which you reach questions which have answers, and then you can build up. Well, the people who rank presidents have no methodology. They are simply ranking people based on how much they like them. But if you ask the questions, what are the challenges that this president faced? What was he trying to do? How successful was it in getting done? And you make organized, small answers to those questions, you will realize that Truman didn't do anything right. I mean, nothing. He couldn't manage the press. He couldn't get along with Congress. He couldn't get his bills through. He did more to promote what is called the McCarthy era than McCarthy did. He behaved disgracefully. The man had no idea what he was doing. And we have a great woman in this community who has written glowingly about him, and she knows 1 billion times more about him than I do, and I don't dispute the fact that she knows more about him. If one of the two of us is going to be regarded as an expert, she's the one. Listen to her, don't listen to me, right? Nonetheless, she thinks what she thinks, and I think what I think, and unless she can convince me, I ain't changing my mind.
Well, the reason I brought this up is because, that's the story of your whole baseball, your success writing about baseball. You didn't buy into what everybody was telling you was true. I did. When I was growing up, I just assumed that everything I read in the newspaper was correct until I read the first book of Bill's that I read in 1984, and then I realized, oh no, I was wrong. But I was 18, I was the right age to pick up on that. And my theory has always been that the reason it took so long for baseball to accept it is because there weren't any 18-year-olds running baseball teams in the 1980s.
Ideas take time to be accepted because people grow up, and the people who run baseball teams now grew up reading my stuff, so they think about it in a totally different way.
So I want to talk about the Red Sox for a minute, at least obliquely.
Yeah.
One of the things that we have learned over the last 10 or 15 years is that even very smart teams can make mistakes, or at least what seem like mistakes.
Yes.
I'm not going to ask you to explain Pablo Sandoval's contract or even Julio Lugo's unless you'd like to, but I'm more interested in the process whereby these decisions are made and how they can go wrong.
We had every reason. I know that some Red Sox fans are angry with Pablo because they don't feel he's made a sincere effort to earn his money. I know that's true. We signed him. We knew what he was. We'd seen him on film. The focus of that should be us, not him. It's that in particular was a matter of money finding its natural target. We had players coming off the books. We had salaries coming off the books that made money available, and our offense was sucky. And so we went after the guys who had the biggest stats. There isn't any way to defend it. We made it. Hopefully, Pablo will get back to being the player he was, and then we can defend it. But hopefully, Pablo still has great years in front of him. I hope that's true. But based on what's happened so far, we just...
Well, again, getting away from the specific, I think one of the things that a lot of us remember reading in the abstracts was you were sort of generally not wild about teams signing free agents at all.
Right.
Because, as I believe the quote is, you're always buying into a declining market,
Yes.
especially if the player's in their 30s.
Right.
And when you've got money to spend, is just inevitable you're going to buy into declining markets?
Well, yes. When an organization signs a player who turns out to be really good, you can't run around and say, I did this, and you can't, or the organization degenerates into warring component camps of people trying to claim credit for things. Everything we did as a group. When a decision goes bad, we can't talk very much about why it went bad, other than to accept responsibility for it. But for the same reason, that the organization falls apart because people are trying to get out of the way of the spray. So I can't talk about the specifics of why that was done or something else was done, other than to say that, I accept my share of the responsibility for it. I'm not in any way alibiing.
Well, I mean, it does seem to me that with so much money in the game now, teams are almost literally running out of places to spend it. Is that, do you ever run out of places? Do you ever, are there meetings where people cast about trying to figure out where we can put this money because otherwise it's going to go into John Henry's pockets?
Well, I mean, no, but what you just said explains all of the history of baseball since 1976 in a certain sense, that what you can always do with money is try to outbid somebody else for a player. And so you just keep doing it. One of the great problems with the human race is that greed has no natural limit. And if greed had a natural limit, we would all we would all work through our problems a lot quicker, but it doesn't. And the same is true with a market like that. It has no natural limit. We will never reach the point at which you're looking for a place to spend money because that market will always, well, I don't know, as long as that market is there.
So a happier note, Jackie Bradley Jr.
Yes.
Before last night had a 29-game hitting streak. 3 years ago, in March of 2013, he was hitting, what was it, 500 or 600 something in spring training.
Yeah.
And there was a great outcry in the land, or at least New England, that he had to start the season in the majors. You remember this debate?
Vaguely, yeah.
Vaguely?
Uh-huh.
It would be a crime against humanity if he somehow started the season in the minors. And the Red Sox, it seemed to me at least, gave in and started in the majors, and he got off to a lousy start and has had his ups and downs since then, until this season. And this is his fourth season in the majors. And again, you could speak to this directly or just generally. I'm just curious, what are the dynamics when a team tries to decide how patient to be with someone who they're sure was talented but doesn't perform and then doesn't perform and things just aren't going as well as we thought they were going to?
That's kind of a broad question, and one of the reasons that organizations cease to work over time is that the power centers develop asymmetrically over time. A group of people start out together, all of the power centers are about the same size, and it's like having the wheels on a vehicle all about the same size, if this makes sense. Over time, the power centers get misaligned, so that you get a different answer to that question you just asked me in one case than you do in another. You may get a manager who really, really wants this player in the majors, or you may get a team president who really wants this player in the majors, and the person who would be pushing the other direction may not at that moment have the power that he needs to accomplish what he's trying to accomplish. Ben Cherington's gone, but give Ben credit for this, that when a lot of people had given up on Jackie and said, we got to get this guy out of here, Ben didn't. We still have him, thank God, because Ben continued to believe in him.
The people who gave up on him, were they giving up on him for concrete reasons, or was it based purely on his statistics and his performance in limited action in the majors?
Well, there aren't very many guys who ever had a year like Jackie did in 2012. Was it 2012?
That was his, 13 was his first season.
And then became really good players. Right. So there just aren't very many. So it took a lot of confidence that you saw something there.
Especially when the team had, 5 or 6 outfielders last year, the year before, and,
yeah.
And there was some talk about, well, if we're going to get rid of somebody, this should be the guy, right?
Right. But I don't know if that answers your question. You asked the opposite question, why did we bring him up too early? But I don't know that we.
No, that wasn't the question. I was wondering how you decide to stay patient with someone to the degree that you did, and I think.
Yeah, well, I think it's more Ben than anybody else.
Okay.
Well, I don't know. John Farrell too. John always believed that there was a great player there. That if we could just get past the entry-level stuff.
Mm-hmm. All right, I want to throw a few inside baseball subjects of the moment at you. Answer is at whatever length you like. Your just general impression. How about the new strike zone they're talking about, raising it up to about an inch or two?
I get really nervous when people start talking about messing with the strike zone. Messing with the strike zone is the heart of baseball, and messing with the strike zone is heart surgery. I would rather do a lot of other different things before I would mess with the strike zone, because I'm just afraid it's too dangerous. Also, when they messed with the strike zone in '63 and '69, they really didn't understand what they were doing. I was a child then; those things had a big impact on me, so I'm very, frankly, afraid of messing with the strike zone. On the other hand, it used to be universal belief among doctors that if you touched the human heart, the patient would die. Now they go in there and play golf. So maybe it'll work. I have a lot more confidence in Manfred and his men than I ever did as opposed to the commissioners of the 1960s. Maybe it'll work. But
yeah, you'd like to think they've studied this thing to death, but they've never released any data or studies or anything, so who knows?
Right.
What about an automated strike zone? You think it's in our future?
It's in our present. We're moving toward it in stages, right? We're going to. My son, when he was 6 years old, became fascinated by the concept of the self-driving car, and we'd talk about when are we going to have self-drive cars that drive themselves, as they get nearer, you realize that they arrive in stages. First you get cars that have cameras on them, and cars that can back themselves into a parking space, and cars that have cruise control. We're getting there. We're just getting there in stages. Same thing with the automated strike zone. We're getting there. We're just getting there in stages.
For those who don't know, there's a technology that's in baseball right now. Every ballpark has these amazingly wonderful cameras that track every single thing that happens on the field. The baseball, all the players. It's called StatCast, and one of the annoying things for people like me is that none of the data, well, very little of the data, relatively speaking, is actually available to the public, which is a first. Before this, almost everything you needed to do sort of work that Bill did publicly was available if you knew it well, at least in the 80s and the 90s. And now there's all this amazing data that isn't out there. And I'm just wondering, Bill, A, how much you've had a chance to play with the data, and B, what you think its private nature means for the future of baseball research.
Well, you say that everything used to be public, but I had a huge battle in the early 1980s to make things public, and they're public because we went to war and made them public.
And created them.
What's that?
And created them with StatSync,
right.
too.
I believe in public. I think we all benefit from public records. I believe in the records of unless you're going to. I think I said this to Dan Okrent in 1979. Unless you're going to close the stadiums and play the games in the dark, it's public record. Make it public. Did I say that to you? Yeah. That's still what I believe today. But the people who are creating that data have to make money off of it, or they're not going to create it. And I understand that. So if this is their theory of how they're going to make money off of it, we can put up with it, I guess.
You don't think that baseball itself, or the teams are preventing the data from being public? My theory when I heard about all this 5 years ago was that the players won't allow it to become public because nobody wants to be the guy at the bottom of the list on best jump off first base or the quickest first step at shortstop.
I don't think that's true at all. It's true nobody wants to be. It's true that nobody wants to be at the bottom of the list, but they all understand that they're very well paid to be in a public profession, and somebody's at the top of the errors list and the top of the strikeouts list and the bottom of the other list, and I don't think that's an impediment. But it may be that there are one of the meanings of the word conservative is holding things back, and I understand that I'm not against the conservatives, but I understand there may be conservatives in that sense hiding in the woodworks of places that I don't know where they are, and it takes time to get things out in the open.
So the anti-David Ortiz infield shifts, have you softened your stance on those any in the last couple of years?
Well, enough data has come out that I realized part of what I was saying was wrong. I never believed in the shift. My business partner and good friend John DeWan is one of the primary advocates of the shift, and he was telling people to use these shifts for years before anybody paid any attention to them. I never believed in them, and the reason I never believed in them was for 10 years, the only hitter in the American League people shifted against was David Ortiz, and what good did it ever do them? I mean, the damage that David does is when he hits the ball, over people's heads and over the walls, and you can put them infielders anywhere you want to, and so I never believed in it. One of the things that eventually won me over was the data came out and showed it doesn't do any good against David. People believe that it does, but because it is frustrating that he hits hard ground balls into the shift sometimes, and you feel like you're losing a lot. But everybody hits hard ground balls at infielders. The data finally came out and shows it doesn't do a damn thing to David Ortiz, really, but it does hurt a lot of other hitters.
What is it about Ortiz that makes him invulnerable to the shift, basically?
He's not invulnerable. It does cost him something, but if you hit the ball in the seats, if you hit the ball off the wall, there's nothing the shift can do about it. David is, or like Encarnacion of Toronto when he's on, the places he hits the ball, you can't put a fielder. So there's enough data out now that another thing about the shifts that I was reluctant to believe in for a long time, and people kept telling me, Bill, you should believe in this stuff because this is data driven and you're a data guy and you should believe in this. And you don't understand, my job is to be a skeptic. My job is to make people prove things before I believe in them. And that applies to the positions in my area as much as it does in anywhere else. If you watched the Red Sox in those years, which I assume many of you did, there are a lot of plays where that shift hurt people. You probably remember the play where Dustin Pedroia steals second, gets up and takes third because nobody's watching it. A really common one was there's a pop out near third base, and if the fielder was where he belonged, he would go over and catch the ball, but nobody can get to it because there's no third baseman there. There are a lot of plays where an unusual defensive alignment. Another common one was David would hit what looks like a ground ball double play, but instead of the shortstop being the pivot man on the double play, it's the third baseman, and he doesn't know how to make the play right, so the play doesn't get made. Until enough data came up to summarize all of the plays for a large number of batters, I wasn't going to believe that this helps the defense. Okay, now we're at that point where there's enough data to show that it does help the defense. It doesn't help a lot. It doesn't radically shift the percentages in the game, but it does help the defense. So okay, I believe it now. I wasn't going to believe it until there was data there to prove it.
I would assume you would dismiss the notion they should somehow outlaw the shift.
Sure.
Especially since, the effect has been overstated. It doesn't really change batting average on balls in play very much. It doesn't really change hitter statistics. It's almost just an aesthetic thing that people seem to bother people.
Yeah. Well.
I mean, can you see a time when managers are shifting players all over the field depending on who's batting? For example, if you have a left-hand pull hitter, move your great left fielder over to right field just for that batter and then shift him back? Or wouldn't you have to put a rule, wouldn't you have to outlaw that just to save time?
Well, if
There's a limit, right?
I think the limit is sooner or later people have to realize, if I just slow down my bat a little bit and slap that ball the other way, they're going to have to stop doing that.
Well, that's the argument that you always hear. Why doesn't this guy just bunt when nobody's
Right.
playing third base? Why don't they bunt? Is it pure ego?
It's just not yet. But people have been trained. People playing in the majors now were taught how to play a long time ago, and they've been trained to play the game one way, and this is the way they're sure it's going to work. But there's another generation coming along, and they're working on, as soon as they start shifting against them in the minors, in college, they're going to start figuring out, all right, how do I beat that? And it'll beat itself.
So there's a new book out called The Arm by Jeff Pass, and it's about all the basically it's about all the Tommy John surgeries it's called an epidemic. For those who don't know, you tear your elbow ligaments, and they can repair that with a ligament from a cadaver or from your leg or from your wrist, but then you spend a year recovering, and there are more of them than ever in the majors, in the minors, in high school, in college, and people are trying to figure out a way to a way out of that. But it seems to me that the incentives for doing the things that cause that injury are much greater than any incentives to prevent them. What do you think about that?
At this time, they are. You're right. That's right. Historically, many pitchers didn't hit their stride until many of the greatest pitchers didn't hit their stride until they were 25 or 26. Historically, many of the dominant pitchers were 21, 22, 23, but many of the pitchers who had long careers were the guys who didn't step forward until they were a little older. Warren Spahn, Bob Gibson, Gaylord Perry. Many of the best pitchers were later developers. What's happening is Randy Johnson. We're kind of pushing more and more of the pitchers into the B group. We're not doing the structure of incentives that we have at the present time, financial incentives in the pro game, but also incentives in amateur world, do not allow that patience, that rest period for pitchers, for younger pitchers, that enables pitchers to develop and last for a longer time, if that makes sense. And most of that is before guys go pro. Most of the damage that causes the Tommy John surgery, and this could be like an ignorant old line thought, but it's what I assume, what I believe, until somebody shows me the other. A lot of what causes the Tommy John surgeries is what happens to players when they're 14, 15, 16, 17. If the pitcher isn't impressive at that age, he doesn't get to go to a good school to pitch. He doesn't, a frontline pitcher in college, he doesn't get drafted high. He doesn't get drafted at all. So the system to find the later slow developing players doesn't exist, or the incentives don't exist.
Right now, the disincentive is that you will miss a year, and the recovery rate's about 80%. But there's a new version of the surgery where the recovery time is only 6 months. You theoretically get the surgery in the off season and be back for spring training the next year, or at least for opening day, which turns into basically an incentive to keep throwing. I think the Tommy John rate is roughly as high for foreign-born players as well. So everybody blames the travel ball teams and these kids throwing all these innings, but it seems that it's happening to kids from the Dominican Republic and Venezuela as well. I just don't see how you're ever going to get people to not throw as hard as they possibly can when that's what's valued.
Well, maybe we should look at the positive part of it. I mean, that was news to me that they use ligaments from cadavers. But if they can use ligaments from cadavers, why couldn't they use my ligament? I mean, I'm not really using it, I don't think. And wouldn't it be fun to think that a little part of you could be in the majors? So I think what the solution to this is that we should all volunteer. So we should start a Use My Ligament fund. And that way we get, well.
So the last time I did one of these with Bill was probably 8 or 9 years ago. I was surprised to learn that Bill was focusing a lot of his time on things that were not just individual players or the Red Sox even, but baseball as a whole. Bill writes about these things sometimes on his website. He wrote something recently about baseball's stability. The most stable time in Major League history was 1903 to 1952, basically.
Right.
50 years when literally no team moved.
Right.
And we're approaching that level of stability now over the last 28 years, basically. And Bill wrote this. But there is such a thing as too much stability, too. We may be near the point at which that is the greater threat. A lack of change, a death of the ability to make changes is never healthy. If there is too much stability, then the location of the franchises gets out of whack with the population centers. The problem gets worse the longer you ignore it. We need to start creating fans in the Charlotte area. I skipped a sentence, by the way. We are near the point at which something needs to be done. Now, speaking of incentives and disincentives, in 2013, MLB's revenues were estimated $8 billion, 2014, $9 billion, and last year, $9.5 billion. Is there any incentive right now for baseball to do anything but continue to plow along as they have for a while now?
What's that great line from Chinatown? This rich guy owns the whole valley, and he's still trying to steal more. And the Jack Nicholson character asks him, "What's it for? How many steaks can you eat?" And he says, "Why, the future, Mr. Geddes, the future." I assume that the people who run baseball are still trying to own the future.
Well, it seems that criticism for a long time was that they weren't thinking more than a year or two ahead.
Exactly.
And are they now?
I think so. I think baseball is tremendously better now than it was 10 years ago at looking down the road and trying to see where this is going and nudging us in the direction. I mean, I mentioned I'm afraid of farting around with the strike zone. I don't want you to do that. But I have a lot more confidence in the people running the show now fixing the problems that I did a generation ago.
And you think baseball makes more sense with, say, 32 teams or even more 5 years from now, 10 years from now?
We talked earlier about Hal Bodley. The most intelligent thing I ever knew Hal to say was that part of what made baseball special was its smallness. That a lot of us grew up knowing all the players, and knowing who played. There were only 16 teams, and you knew everybody on every team. That is part of the preciousness of the game, that it is small enough that you can. It's a universe that exists. That's why I became who I became. I don't understand the world. I never did understand the world, and I don't understand it now. But baseball is a little universe that is simple enough that you kind of understand some of it. And everything that's true in baseball is true in the world at large, only it's small enough that you can understand it. There is a danger in expanding so much that you can't hold it all in your head anymore. I'm not in a hurry but on the other hand, a great city grows up and it's got no baseball team, that hurts baseball. So I don't know.
So a departure for a minute. When I worked for Bill, he somehow managed to convince me I should be reading books by Ann Rule about Ted Bundy. I've never quite been the same. Bill turned his interest in that sort of thing into a really wonderful book that came out a few years ago called Popular Crime. Bill, why crime? When did this start? When did this interest start? And maybe a little bit about what you're working on now.
I have read crime stories in the newspapers as long as I could read.
So when you were a child growing up in Marietta, you were reading the horrible things in the newspaper?
Mostly. That was the only things I read. The first things I read in the newspaper when I learned to read and realized that they delivered fresh reading material to your house every day, which was a wonderful revelation. I pity the children who don't have that moment where, wow, they bring a book every day. I don't really pity them. I mean, they get a new Twitter feed every 4 seconds, and they probably think, wow, that was awful. You people only got one new newspaper a day. Anyway, the things I would read were Dear Abby, the comics, and the crime stories, and the sports, the baseball, of course. So I've always been interested in those stories, and I think crime stories are like baseball in this way, that they are clues to the parts of us that we don't understand, or that we understand the most poorly. One of the first crime stories I remember reading, I think Norman Mailer used to own this house, this building, or part of it, or something. One of the first crime stories I remember reading is about Norman Mailer stabbing his wife or something. And so I asked people, who's Norman Mailer? And this is how I found out about the world. Crime stories are clues to those parts of ourselves that we don't understand. The things that we keep hidden about ourselves, the things that we don't want people to know, the things that we don't want to admit are in there, those are the things that come out in crime stories. And crime stories are fascinating because they are road maps to the part of human nature that we are perpetually trying to civilize out of ourselves. I'm not saying it's wrong to try to civilize it out of ourselves. It's good. Try to civilize it out of ourselves, but we don't understand it if we won't talk about it. What I was trying to do with popular crime was make people aware of how we go like this, how we limit our understandings. If you turn on the television, your television at home at this moment, there will be 25 channels doing crime stuff. 25 channels doing true crime stuff and another 25 doing fictional detective stuff. But there is no serious discussion anywhere about the effect on society of these ubiquitous stories. There's no, and I shouldn't say there's no discussion anywhere, because I am certain that there must be an academic discussion of it somewhere. You all read the academic stuff? But what I was trying to make people aware of is the fact that we close our eyes to the serious and real effects of events that we just don't want. We just think we're too. I think we're on public radio here, right? NPR doesn't do crime stories, right? I mean, once in a while. NPR is serious. We're too serious to do this. No, we're not. These are serious events. And there is a good reason why society picks crimes at random and makes a big deal out of them. And I was trying to get people to think that through and realize a little bit better what they are doing in closing that off. I don't know if that makes any sense.
So one more for Bill, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. Excuse me. I had something else I was going to read, but I realized that I've already read too much. Bill wrote an article, or an essay in 1984 on inside baseball, being an insider, and basically what you can miss when you're on the inside as opposed to being on the outside, as Bill was. I will say, Bill wrote, the insiders will be amazed at what we can help them to see, or maybe they won't, who knows. But anyway, we'll have some fun. Snake oil 195. You've now been an insider for almost 15 years, and I suspect we'll have to wait until you're not an insider for the book where you tell us everything you've learned. But I was hoping you could maybe favor us with the most important thing that at least half the people in this audience don't know about baseball that you've learned as an insider.
The two most important things I've learned from being an insider are, number one, just how many people are involved in the success of an organization. I had no concept. I mean, to create an organization like the Red Sox, it really requires hundreds of people contributing in one way or another. And I really didn't have any understanding of that. And you can't really explain it. I remember being at home and I was talking to a friend of mine who's a Red Sox fan, and he said, well, would there be anybody at Fenway Park now? It was like December or something. I said, yeah, there'd be like hundreds of people there working. And he said, what are they doing? You can't really understand it unless you're there. And the other thing is that there are ways of thinking about problems that are inevitable within the game, and you can't beat them back with logic. It's just the way it is. This is the way it's got to be done, and there's no way to argue it down. And a simple example: the Kansas City Royals. I live in Kansas, and the people around me follow the Royals and love the Royals. After they won the World Series last year, they made a number of questionable decisions about their players, signing to long-term contracts and players maybe didn't deserve it. You got no choice. You win the World Series, you have to pay the people who won the World Series for you. If you don't, you've got a bad reputation. You know, you're the guys who didn't pay your players when they won for you. So, you know, yeah, they're bad decisions. You got no choice. There are a lot of things like that. There are a lot of things you got no choice but to do for reasons that are not so that are logical, but the unwritten rules are as important sometimes. Well, if you're on a date, the unwritten rules of dating are 1,000 times more important than the written rules, right? I don't know if there are any written rules. But the same is true in baseball. A lot of times the unwritten rules are a lot more important than the written rules.
Okay, step right up, folks. Snake oil free. Yep.
Please repeat the question.
Okay.
Multi-part question. What is it that they're looking to change about the strike zone, number one? What is it supposed to do, number two? Why don't you like it, number three? And number four, given that the strike zone changes every night anyway, depending on who's behind the plate, what difference does it make?
So the question was, what are they doing to the strike zone? Why are they doing it? Will it work, or will it make a difference?
The strike zone, there's talk about moving it from the kneecap to the top of the knee, like up by about
the hollow of the knee. A phrase you will never hear in any other context.
I didn't realize.
It's in the rule book.
Is it?
Yep.
Could you explain exactly where they're?
Well, if you move your fingers down there, you can feel a little hollow right there, beneath your kneecap.
Is that the one where your knee is supposed to go like that?
Now, how the umpire is supposed to spot that hollow, I have no idea, but that's what the rule says.
And there. The feeling is that umpires have a peculiar. The feeling among some people is that umpires have a peculiar difficulty in. I'm about to make a joke about midget umpires. I don't want to do that. I'm going to get in trouble here. The umpires have difficulty seeing the pitch at that height, and so it's always going to be inaccurate. So you want to move it up and also, too damn many strikeouts. Well, that's not going to change the strikeout issue. I just think I think we really, really do need to address the problem of strikeouts going up and up and up and up. But I don't think that messing around the strike zone is the way to do it. And I don't, but as I say, I have more confidence in the people who are running the show now than I used to. So, I'm sorry. Was that how many of your 4 questions did I answer?
That's basically it. So I guess a follow-up to that is also, it seems to me probably because of the massive amount of statistics that the pitchers have more knowledge about patterns of hitters. And maybe that needs to be reverse engineered so that the batters have a better idea of what they can expect out of pitchers.
Yeah, well, batters study stuff too. One of the biggest revelations to me, how many of you read Ball 4 years ago? Jim Bouton in Ball 4 talks about pitchers trying to hit the corners of the strike zone, and he basically says you can't do it. That pitchers don't have that degree of control. One of the most astonishing things that I've learned in the last 10 years is that since they started putting that box on TV, they hit the corners of that zone all the time. I mean, and pitches that get into the fat part of the plate get hit really hard. Bouton was just totally wrong about that, but I believed his view of it until they started putting those boxes on TV.
I didn't believe that catchers were stealing strikes until the data came out showing that, yes, they were indeed stealing strikes.
Right. Okay. You realize you just asked a follow-up to a 4-part question there. Pretty sure there's a rule against that.
Yeah, in the back.
I was wondering about how much data is kept on players as they come up through the minor leagues. It seems like there aren't the predictors of who will be successful.
Right.
Often folks who are not first-tier players like this Shaw we have now.
So the question is about the data used to evaluate players in the minor leagues and how predictive they are.
I could give a half-hour lecture to that and put to sleep those of you who are not already asleep. I get a report from the Red Sox every day on the minor leaguers. It's about a 15, 20-page report. It covers every at-bat by every one of our minor league players, whether he did something good like got a quick jump off first and made it to first to third on a single. Every time an outfielder makes a throw, the report includes, is it a good throw, is it not a good throw, is it strong enough? I love this stuff. I mean, if I were ever to leave the Red Sox, this is what I would miss. It's fantastic to get this long report every day on what every minor leaguer does. So we get, as to whether we get reports, oh yeah, we get really good reports on a lot of them. Dan and Rob will remember that one of my first big arguments, philosophical arguments with baseball, was on the predictive significance of minor league statistics. It was widely believed and almost universally believed among the baseball establishment that you couldn't predict what a guy would hit in the majors based on what he hit in the minors. And my argument was, yes, you can. You guys just don't know what you're doing. People would project them without any understanding of mathematical nuances like park factors and up and down cycles and randomness. And so you do get situations where guys would hit 330 in the minors and get to the majors and be 220 hitters, but it was mostly predictable if you knew what you were doing. But it's not 100% predictable. With the Red Sox, I can say honestly, we really did not understand how good Travis Shaw was. And he had a moment, I think it was 2012, when we were really excited about him, and we really were up on him, and we thought he might be what he now is. But then a couple of years he wasn't, things didn't break his way, and we really did not understand how good he is. And, I think some guys just turn it on at different times. And it's not, if you don't know when a guy is going to turn it on, it doesn't mean you're stupid. You just don't know things that there's no way of knowing.
Yep.
To what degree do you find variation among players and their performance based on qualitative factors that cannot be measured statistically? People's willingness to play hard, people's attitudes about the game. Is that all sort of worked through by the time they become into the majors, or is that still, those intangibles or qualitative factors still an important fact?
What my career is based on is trying to make intangibles tangible. Many of the things that I measure are things that used to be regarded as intangible, but they're actually tangible. You just have to figure out how to measure them. You can measure whether a player runs hard. You know how long it takes him to run to first base. You can measure, it's not intangible. You just have to, it's just work. Baseball has ways of forcing out the guys who don't want to do it. There's one guy in the majors now, I won't mention the name, but who just, he has phenomenal talent. He just doesn't want to play. There's one. If you don't want to do it, you ain't going to catch a break. And in order to get to the next level and get to the next level and get to the next level and get to the next level, you have to catch breaks. If your manager thinks you're the guy who who doesn't hustle, you ain't catching any breaks. So those are not statistical guards, but there are gatekeepers there to does that make sense? Do you believe it, or do you think it?
Yep.
By the way, pleasure to be here with everybody. It's a wonderful venue. I teach at a high school here on the Cape, and when we were merging with the town next door, we were asked if we wanted to teach some electives. So I threw two out. One was on the Kennedy years, and the other one was baseball and society class. And I kind of think they looked at the top one on the list, and the other one just sort of slid in there. So when I put this class together, I was shocked to find that there really wasn't much in the way of a high school textbook, the other one, baseball history. So I cobbled something together, and I've been teaching this for the last few years. And this is leading to a question, so don't worry. What I've noticed with kids who've taken the class, and it's pretty popular, one, because it's fairly easy because it's an elective. Kids are just not into baseball like we all were when we were younger. And I was wondering if you've ever kind of tried to figure out where we're going demographically. It would seem to me the demographics getting older and older while the sport keeps making more and more money. But looking at it at kind of the high school level, I don't see baseball doing quite enough to get the history out there to kids.
Well, the question is about demographics and baseball and whether or not there will be enough baseball fans in 20 years to replace the ones that we unfortunately lose through various...
That's why I've chosen to be an older person. We're going to die, it's not my problem. I agree, it's an issue. But baseball is different now than, the nature of baseball fandom is different now than it was 40, 50 years ago. People don't collect baseball cards as kids anymore. And they don't, put them on the spokes of their bicycles because they don't have bicycles. And some of the old stuff was great, and you wish there was some way to bring it back. But it may well be that baseball survives and thrives economically with a different kind of appeal than it had years ago.
Well, and I think that people still come to baseball. They might come to it a little later. Model trains are still very popular. They just tend to have an older demographic, and I think baseball might follow those same lines. And also, it's when your team wins the World Series, you find a lot of kids who love the team, and they found the sweet spot for kids is about 10 to 12, I think. If your team wins when you're in that little band, you'll be a baseball fan for a long time. And one great thing about the baseball today is with parity, relative parity, a lot of teams win every year or two or three. And I think baseball is creating a lot of young fans. Anyone else? Yeah, back. Yes.
Bill and Rob, both, you had mentioned the 2004 and the 2013 Red Sox, and I was just wondering what the 2004 Red Sox did. I think we can all agree was nothing short of miraculous, coming down 3 games to coming back 3 games to none and so forth. But at the same time, that was a great baseball team.
Right.
In 2013, when that team took the field, personally, I did not look at that team as being a great baseball team. I looked at it as being a very poor baseball team. And you had mentioned, Bill, about teams projecting every year to
Right.
find out, where will we end up. Did you honestly project that 2013 team to make the World Series and even have a chance at the World Series?
So the question was, did Bill think that the 2013 Red Sox had a shot at the World Series before the season?
Well, I mean, the 2013 is much more of a miracle team than the 2004 team. The 2013 team really did, and I hope I can talk about this without getting emotional, but I guess I can't. I mean, they really did say, we ain't taking this.
Yes.
So you mentioned, Bill, that when you were young, 1963, and they tinkered with the strike zone, it was very upsetting to you. I was planning on asking this question before you just became emotional now, but it's beautiful to see that it still affects you. I wanted to ask if you could tell us a little bit about what the young Bill James was like vis-a-vis the world of sports and your passion, and also, second question, if you had not focused all of your insights and abilities into this world, is there another world that you might have turned to and revolutionized?
Yeah.
The question was about what was Bill James like as a kid, which I think is fascinating. We all wonder that. And what might Bill have become if he hadn't become Bill James?
Well, the 1963 redefining the strike zone didn't upset me at the time. It just didn't work. It was a disaster. I mean, it was intended. They didn't think through what they were doing, and I wasn't upset by it at the time. I assume they're adults, they know what they're doing. Wrong. As to what I would have done if I hadn't gone into baseball, I would have liked to be the Ogden Nash of this generation and write silly poems. I think I could have done it. And whether I would ever have been able to make a living writing silly poems, I don't know. But I would have enjoyed it. And so that's one thing.
You dodged the what was Bill James like as a kid question.
Yeah, well, some of you must be writers, right? I'd like to find a writer who had a happy childhood. I don't think I've met one yet.
Anyone else? Yes. Last question? Okay. 2 more questions. Go ahead.
How do you rate somebody like a Brock Holt who can play every single
Right.
position? I mean, he could even.
I I've always wondered if there's a way to quantify utility, Bill. Is there?
There must be. You asked the question earlier about intangibles, but that is a really, really good analytical question, because there is a value there in that the manager doesn't have to. You could give Dustin Pedroia needs a day off because his hamstring is tight. No problem. We'll just put Brock Holt at second. The center fielder, runs into the wall in the fourth inning. No problem. We'll just put Brock Holt out there. There's tremendous value in the fact that you can do that. But how you quantify that value is something that I don't understand, and I've been thinking about it and trying to figure out how do I quantify this value, but I can't. And I know there is an answer. I don't believe in intangible things that are real. It's just that a lot of the real things are so complicated that for us to figure out how to quantify them is going to take maybe 100 generations, seriously. It's going to take a long time to figure out how to quantify some things. But, I mean, that's a simpler one, and we will figure it out, but we haven't yet.
Yeah, I've always thought about it as
great question.
I've always thought about it as organizational capital, and it costs X capital for the manager to figure out who's going to play when Pedroia is out.
Right.
But I haven't gotten any farther than that.
You're on a road trip, right? You're on the West Coast where you can't make here somebody shows up at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and says, I can't go today. We can call Pawtucket and get somebody else. You're in Oakland, you can't do that, right? So what are you going to do? You're going to take 5 guys from Pawtucket with you to Oakland every time you go out there? You have a Brock Holt that helps a lot.
I mean, we might figure in 20 years that Brock Holt was the most valuable player in the league in 2015 or something. It's possible.
It's too late for him to get paid for it. So, but you know what? This new kid we got, Marco Hernandez, he's kind of like that too. And people haven't figured it out yet. But you can put him anywhere. He's pretty good.
So the Red Sox basically, they haven't cornered the market, but they have the shortest players, they have the most useful players, and they have the only knuckleballer basically. Well, one of two. Which I don't know what that means, but the Reds. You used to write that only poor organizations or losing organizations would take chances on players like that, but that doesn't really define the Red Sox.
That's a nice thought. That would be a nice thought to end the evening. But I saw
one more
somebody.
question.
Somebody still had a question.
Thank you. Ted Williams was famous for saying baseball was the hardest sport, trying to hit a round ball with a round bat. And with all the statistics and all the metrics that we collect today, how is technology being used? These guys are seeing videos of the pitches. I imagine pitching machines have simulations of the pitches. Can you talk a little bit about the technology that these players are using before they have to come to bat against the pitcher?
So the question, which could lead to a lecture, I think, Bill, is about the technology that players are using today.
Well, the closer you get to the players, the further you get away from me. I barely interact with the players. However, the shifts are driven by spray charts of where players hit the ball, right? So somebody makes a note of where every ball is hit on the field, and somebody else catalogs what the pitch was, and that's done by guys like me. And eventually, that if you throw a slider to this hitter, he tends to line it the other way. So when the pitcher, if you're throwing sliders to this guy, you shift over. There is an interaction, but it's not. You kind of ask, what's the direct personal interaction of the player with the data? The direct personal interaction of the player is mostly with the coach. And the coach interacts with somebody from the front office who does data, but who also can speak English. So there is an interaction there, but it may be less direct than you're asking.
Thank you, everybody.